that Pharaoh chariot comes, I'm gonna leave you. I'm going to the promised land. I'm gonna leave you. I'm sorry, I'm gonna leave you. Farewell, oh farewell. But I'll meet you in the morning. Farewell, oh farewell. Oh, I'll meet you in the morning. Farewell, oh farewell. This is a cry of a 14-year-old black boy who's just been brutally beaten, torn into, interrogated by the police for 24 hours with no food, no water, no legal guardian or parent in that room with him, and not an ounce of sleep. A 14-year-old unaccompanied minor. And you see, he wasn't alone. Yusef Salaam, Antron McCray, Raymond Santana, and Corey Rise were prone to the same fate as this scared little boy, Kevin Richardson. Today we're going to evaluate how we can tip the scales back to right. We're going to investigate the word justice and what it truly means, and then we're going to see how we can get back to that. Using a little story about 5 boys who went from playing in the park one day to almost spending an eternity in jail the next. The politically correct definition or explanation of the word justice is just behavior or treatment. Just behavior or treatment. That's to say I, as well as anybody else, is being treated fairly based off the rules and regulations that have been set in place. Okay, so here's a rule. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you. This is what those boys should have been told the day they were arrested. Instead, these 5 boys were asked to go into an interrogation room with no legal guardian present. And they were asked to sign a paper that the boys did not read, nor did they understand its purpose, which was to waive their right to an attorney. Things like this are happening to young African American men and women all over America every single day. This is not something that's new. This is not something that has been hidden, and this is not something we have not seen before. Racism is still very real, and it's very much apparent within our justice system today. Brian Banks, a young African American charged with sexual assault, was denied a legal guardian when asked to make a life-changing decision, which was A, plead guilty and spend 40 to life in prison, or B, take a plea. He ended up pleading guilty, having to spend 6 years in prison, and then a few years on parole after that, and then had to be charged as a sex offender in any applications that he had to put in for a job. So let me tell you something about Brian Banks' case. The decision for him to plead guilty was advised by his attorney, who was fearful of herself of what would happen if this young man did not plead guilty. And her fear stemmed from the fact that the jury was almost, if not all, white. Richard Alexander, charged for a crime that he also did not commit, had to spend 77 years in prison before they found out that his case was falsified as well. George Floyd. We all know what happened to this one. See, it was so bad with him because he didn't even get the opportunity to spend some time in prison. They just took his life. He was forced down on a hard concrete floor by a white man whose knee was pressed against his neck, and he did not move. Help. I can't breathe. I can't breathe, man. Just move. I can't breathe. He pleaded for his life. He begged for his life, but that officer still did not move. Help, man. I'll get in the car. I'll get in the car. Please, I can't breathe. point that he ended up calling his mama. And the officer stood there with his knee pressed against his neck until George Floyd was lifeless. And even then, the officer did not move. So you see, this is a problem. You see, it's very evident. So the question is, how do we fix it? How do we make sure our young African American men and women know how to conduct themselves accordingly when they're in the presence of a police officer? Education. We need to educate our young African American men and women on how to present themselves accordingly, conduct themselves accordingly when they're in the presence of an officer. How to say yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir. How to follow the rules in that moment so that they can live to fight another day. A couple months ago, my dad got pulled over by an officer himself. And the officer walked to his car and he said, "Sir, I need to see your license and registration, please." My dad had both hands on the steering wheel and he said, "Sir, my license and registration is in my glove compartment. Can I please get my license and registration out of my glove compartment?" The officer said yes. And before my dad moved his hand, he said, "Sir, I'm getting ready to remove my hand off the wheel to get my license and registration out of my glove compartment." He gets his license and registration, gives it to the officer. The officer takes it back to his vehicle, comes back to my dad's car and says, "Sir, we need you to step out the vehicle." My dad didn't ask why. My dad didn't ask what this is about. Why do I need to move? Why do I need to get out the car? He simply just got out the car. The officer then began to escort him back to his police car, called for backup, and the backup came and sat behind my father, and the officer who originally pulled him over in the first place came and sat next to him. And he began to ask him a bunch of unnecessary questions like, "What are you doing here? Why are you in this part of town? Oh, you're here for work." But my dad didn't ask, "Why are you asking all these questions? What did I do wrong?" He just simply answered the questions. Not only did he answer the questions, but he answered them in such a way that the officer didn't feel threatened by how he was answering him, his persona, and his body language. We have to teach our young men and women on how to be obedient in the moment. Do whatever they have to do in the moment so that they can live to fight another day. Because not only did my father live, but he came home. He came home to me. He came home to my mom. And he came home to my brothers and sisters. We don't know what could have happened. The officer could have shot him dead right then and there. But because my father was educated enough to conduct himself accordingly, to put his manhood aside, put his ego aside, he was able to come home to us and to file a police report so that we are fighting that officer in court. Knowledge is power, and education is key. And if we don't have this, our enemies will always have the upper hand.